When you move into a new home, you never really think about who or what lived there before you. You focus on fresh paint, new furniture, a better life. But sometimes the house doesn't want to start over. Sometimes it remembers. Tonight we're going to a quiet suburban street, a home that looked perfect. Bright walls, green lawns, friendly neighbors. But inside, not a single person ever truly slept. This is the house where nobody slept. Turn off your lights, put on your headphones. And remember, what you hear tonight might follow you home. When we moved into the house on Maple Grove Street, it felt like we had finally made it. It wasn't anything extravagant. 2 floors, white siding, a small yard, and a maple tree that turned gold every autumn. But for me, my wife Laura, and our 2 kids, it was everything we'd worked toward. The kind of place you imagine raising a family. Quiet, safe, normal. I still remember the first morning there. The sun came through the blinds. The air smelled faintly of paint and new carpet, and I thought, this is it. A fresh start. The kids were running from room to room, arguing over who got which bedroom. Laura laughed, calling them back to help unpack, and for a while everything was perfect. The neighborhood was typical suburban life. People jogged in the evenings, waved as they passed. The sound of lawnmowers, dogs barking, sprinklers ticking in the distance. All the small signs of comfort. There was a family next door, the Johnsons, who brought us a pie on our first day. Nothing strange, nothing worth remembering. Not then. It started small. The first night I couldn't sleep. Not because of anything unusual, but because the house was too quiet. In our old apartment, you always heard traffic or the hum of city life. Here, it was a deep silence that seemed to press against your ears. I got up around 2 a.m., went to the kitchen for water, and stood by the window looking out at the street. Every house was dark. Not a single car passed. That's when I thought I heard footsteps upstairs. I froze, listening. It was light, slow. Maybe one of the kids. I waited, but the sound stopped. I went back upstairs, checked both rooms. The kids were asleep. Laura was out cold. I told myself it was just the house settling, a new home adjusting to the cold night. The next day, nothing felt off. We were busy unpacking boxes, arguing about where to hang things. But at night, again, I couldn't shake the quiet. It wasn't peaceful. It felt watchful. A few nights later, Laura mentioned it too. "Do you hear that?" she whispered around midnight. "Hear what?" "Like pacing." From the hallway. I listened, but all I heard was the faint ticking of the clock in the living room. "Probably the pipes," I said. She frowned but nodded. We tried to sleep. By the end of the first week, I started noticing other things. Little things you'd brush off on your own. The TV in the living room turned on by itself once. Volume low, static hissing. A framed photo on the hallway shelf kept turning slightly, always leaning toward the stairs. When I mentioned it to Laura, she laughed. "You're just tired," she said. "New house, new noises." She was right. We'd been staying up late unpacking, working all day. My mind was probably inventing things out of exhaustion. Still, I started leaving a small lamp on in the hallway at night. It made the shadows softer, less alive. One morning, while eating breakfast, our youngest, Emma, 6 years old, said something strange. "Daddy," she said, spooning cereal, "the man in the hallway was crying last night." I froze mid-sip. "What man?" "The one standing by the stairs," she said simply, like it was nothing. "He was sad." Laura gave me a look, then smiled at Emma. "You must have dreamed it, sweetheart." Emma shrugged, went back to eating. But something about the way she said sad stuck with me. That evening, I checked the locks twice before bed. Every door, every window. I even looked in the hallway, half expecting to see someone standing there. But there was nothing. Just the soft yellow light from the lamp and the quiet hum of the refrigerator downstairs. For a while, I convinced myself it was just the move, nerves, new surroundings. The mind plays tricks when it's out of rhythm. But one night, about 2 weeks after we moved in, I woke to the sound of footsteps again. Only this time, they didn't come from upstairs. They were right outside our bedroom door. I reached for the doorknob, opened it slowly. The hallway was empty, the lamp still glowing faintly. But every hair on my neck stood on end. I could feel something, a heaviness, like the air itself was waiting. I went back inside and locked the door. That was the last night I remember sleeping peacefully in that house. From that point on, every night felt slightly off. Too cold, too silent, too long. And though I didn't know it then, nobody would ever really sleep in that house again. After that night, something in the house changed. Not visibly, but in a way I could feel. The air felt heavier, like the walls were holding their breath. Every sound, the hum of the fridge, the creak of the floor, carried too much weight. I told myself it was stress. Work had picked up, the kids were adjusting to a new school, and Laura was trying to make the house feel like home. But even during the day, I started noticing how still everything felt. You could stand in the living room and feel like someone was standing just behind you, waiting for you to turn around. Laura began to wake up tired, saying she felt like she hadn't slept at all, even though she swore she didn't wake up once. The kids too. Emma started coming into our room at night, saying she didn't like her bed anymore. When I asked why, she'd just say, "It keeps whispering." At first, I laughed. Beds don't whisper, sweetheart. But she just looked up at me, serious. It does when the lights are off. A few days later, I found her sitting in the hallway before dawn, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "Did you have another bad dream?" I asked. She shook her head. "I just didn't want to be in there." That's when I noticed something strange. Her room was colder than the rest of the house. Much colder. The thermostat read 71, but when you stepped inside, it felt like walking into a basement. The air was thick, heavy, and still. I checked the vents, the windows, everything. Nothing was open, nothing leaking cold air. Just that uneasy chill. Laura started to notice it too. "It's weird," she said one morning while brushing her hair. "It feels like the house never really warms up, like it doesn't want to." By now, the nights had become unpredictable. Sometimes I'd wake to faint footsteps. Other times, the sound of a door closing softly somewhere downstairs. One night, I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of running water. When I checked the bathroom, the faucet was on full blast. The handle was ice, cold to the touch. Laura swore she hadn't touched it. The kids were asleep. It became a pattern, small, isolated events, easy to explain away if you wanted to. A misplaced item, a door left slightly ajar, a flicker of movement in your peripheral vision. But the explanations never quite fit. One Saturday afternoon, I was in the garage fixing a shelf when I heard Emma talking. Her voice was low, whispering. I thought she was playing with her dolls, but when I peeked in, she was sitting alone on the floor. "Who are you talking to, honey?" I asked. She looked up, startled. "Him." "Who's him?" "The man who doesn't sleep." Something cold crawled up my back. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "He said nobody sleeps here." I felt my mouth go dry. "Emma, there's no one here, okay? You probably just imagined it." She didn't argue. She just looked past me, toward the hallway, and whispered, "He's right there." Of course, there was nothing. Just an empty hall. That night, I didn't mention it to Laura. I didn't want to sound paranoid. But later, while we were watching TV, the baby monitor crackled on. A faint static hiss filled the room. Then, under the static, came a sound, not words exactly, but breathing. Slow, uneven breathing. Laura grabbed the monitor. "Is that?" "I'll check," I said quickly, trying to sound calm. I went upstairs, heart hammering. Both kids were asleep. Nothing out of place. When I came back down, the monitor was silent again. Laura didn't sleep that night. Neither did I. The next few days passed in a fog. I started coming home later, avoiding the house when I could. Even the kids were quieter, like they could feel the tension we were trying not to talk about. Then one night, Laura woke me. "Listen," she whispered. At first, I heard nothing. Then, faintly, the sound of something dragging across the floor. A slow, deliberate scrape, like someone moving furniture down the hallway. I grabbed a flashlight and got up. The sound stopped as soon as I opened the door. The hallway was empty, the lamp still glowing. But the light flickered, once, twice, and then steadied again. The next morning, Laura asked if we should call someone. "Ooh," I said. "An electrician, a priest." She forced a smile, but her eyes said she wasn't joking. I tried to laugh it off, but that night I moved the lamp closer to our bedroom door. I kept the flashlight on the nightstand. I even downloaded an app that recorded nighttime sounds. I wanted proof, or at least an explanation. When I checked the recording the next morning, I nearly dropped my phone. It had picked up whispers. Faint, low, almost too quiet to hear, but definitely human. And between them, a voice that said clear as day, "You shouldn't have come here." I replayed it 5 times, heart pounding harder each time. Laura didn't want to hear it. "Delete it," she said, pale. "Just delete it." But I didn't. I kept it. Because deep down, I already knew something in that house didn't want us there. And whatever it was, it never slept. After that recording, I couldn't unhear the voice. It played in my head constantly. That slow, deliberate warning. "You shouldn't have come here." I didn't tell the kids, of course. And Laura didn't want to talk about it at all. She went through the motions. Work, dinner, bedtime stories. But her eyes had that tired, hollow look. The one people get after too many sleepless nights. Sleep had become impossible, not just because of fear, but because of the strange activity that started happening around 3 every morning. I'd wake up to faint noises, footsteps, a creak, sometimes the sound of someone quietly sighing near the door. The air always felt heavy around that time, like the walls were breathing. One night, I decided to stay up and wait. I sat in the hallway with the lights off, a blanket around my shoulders and my phone ready to record. It was silent for almost an hour. Then, around 30:15, I felt it, a drop in temperature. Sudden and sharp, my breath came out white. That's when the floorboard 2 feet from me creaked, slow and deliberate, like someone was shifting their weight. "Hello," I whispered. No answer. I turned my flashlight on. Nothing. Just the hallway, the faint outline of picture frames, and that same crooked photo. The one that always tilted toward the stairs. When I turned the light off again, the air felt wrong. It was the same silence as before, but it pressed against my ears, made my skin prickle. Then, just as I was about to stand up, I heard it breathing. Slow. Deep. Right next to me. I swung the light around so fast I dropped the phone. The beam hit nothing but the far wall. Still, my chest tightened. I could feel someone there, inches away, watching me. That's when Emma's door opened. She stood there in the faint glow of her nightlight, eyes half open. "Daddy," she mumbled. "He says you shouldn't look at him." I froze. "What, honey?" She blinked slowly. The man in the hallway. Her voice was flat, dreamlike. "I carried her back to bed, trying to stay calm. You had a bad dream. Go back to sleep." But when I tucked her in, her skin was ice cold. That night, Laura and I slept with the bedroom light on. The next day, I brought up the idea of moving. Just casually, while we were making breakfast. Laura didn't even look at me. "We can't," she said. "We've barely unpacked, and we can't afford to just leave." I didn't push it. But she avoided the subject after that. The next few nights, the house grew restless. Shadows seemed to move when you weren't looking. The faint smell of damp wood lingered in the halls, like the scent of an old basement. One morning, I woke to find muddy footprints in the hallway. Small, bare footprints leading from the kids' rooms toward the stairs. But both children were still asleep, and the prints were too small to be mine or Laura's. I cleaned them before anyone else woke up. I didn't even tell Laura. It was around this time I started dreaming, or maybe seeing things. It was hard to tell. In one dream, I woke up standing in the hallway, staring into the dark stairwell. There was a figure at the bottom, faintly glowing white, shoulders shaking as if crying. I couldn't move. I just stood there watching until it turned its head toward me. I woke up screaming. Laura came running in. "What happened?" I tried to explain, but the words didn't come out right. "It felt real," I said. Like I wasn't dreaming. She didn't answer. She just sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing her arms, whispering, "It feels like something's watching us." That morning, she found all the picture frames in the hallway face down. Every single one. We tried everything logical. Called the previous owner, an older woman who lived out of state. She was polite at first, but when I mentioned the hallway, she went quiet. "You're still in that house?" she asked softly. "Yes," I said. "Why?" A pause. "Then you should keep the lights on at night." She hung up before I could ask anything else. After that, I started noticing the eyes. Reflections, in mirrors, in the TV when it was off, even in the microwave door. Tiny flashes, like someone was standing behind me for just a second. I started covering the mirrors at night. Laura didn't even ask why. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of whispering again. Louder this time. Not just one voice, but several murmuring over each other. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was desperate pleading. The sound came from inside the walls. I pressed my ear to the plaster and almost jumped. There was something. Scratching. Faint, frantic scratching. Laura woke up, eyes wide. "What is that?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because the scratching moved. It traveled along the wall down the hall, stopping right outside our door. We stayed frozen, listening. Then a voice whispered from the other side. Clear, soft, and horribly close. "Why won't you let us rest?" I think we both stopped breathing. That was the night I realized this wasn't a haunting that wanted to scare us. It wanted to keep us. After that, even daytime felt wrong. Shadows seemed thicker, the light weaker. The kids grew pale, quiet. Laura barely ate. And me, I stopped knowing when I was awake and when I was dreaming. Because no matter what time it was, day or night, I could still hear that faint, steady breathing somewhere in the house. And once, just before dawn, I whispered into the empty air, "What do you want?" And something whispered back, almost lovingly, to make sure you never sleep again. It happened on a Thursday night. I remember because it was the first evening in weeks that almost felt normal. We'd ordered pizza, watched a movie with the kids, and for a little while the house seemed quiet again. No whispers, no flickering lights, just peace. By 10, the kids were asleep. Laura and I sat on the couch, too tired to talk. I remember telling her, maybe it's over. She didn't answer, just smiled weakly and leaned against my shoulder. We went to bed around 11. The house was still. Then, around 20:47 a.m., I woke to the sound of screaming. At first, I thought it was part of a dream. That sharp, raw kind of scream that doesn't even sound human. But then I heard it again. It was Emma. I shot up, heart pounding. The air felt thick, heavy like I was underwater. Laura was already out of bed running for the door. "Emma!" she shouted. When I opened the bedroom door, the hallway light flickered violently, flashing on and off like a strobe. In those flashes, I could see something, a shape, black and hunched, darting down the hall toward Emma's room. "Stop!" I yelled, sprinting after it. But when I reached the doorway, the room was empty. Emma was standing on her bed, trembling, pointing toward the corner. "He was here!" she sobbed. "He was right there!" I ran to her, scanning every shadow. Nothing. Just that cold air again, the kind that bites your skin. Laura came in, breathless. "What happened?" I was shaking. "I don't know." "She saw someone," and Emma cried. "He said it's almost morning, but nobody gets to wake up." Before I could respond, a loud bang echoed through the house, from the living room. Then another and another. It sounded like someone slamming a door repeatedly. I handed Emma to Laura. "Stay here. Don't move." When I stepped into the hall, the lights died completely. Darkness swallowed everything. My only guide was the faint glow from my phone. I moved slowly down the stairs, each step groaning under my weight. Halfway down, I heard a whisper right next to my ear. "You shouldn't have looked." I swung the light around, but there was nothing. Just the living room. All the furniture pushed toward the center like something had been moving it. The television flickered on by itself. Static filled the room, loud and violent. Then for a split second an image flashed, not clear, but enough to make my blood run cold. A pale face pressed close to the screen, eyes wide open, mouth moving silently. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the coffee table. That's when Laura screamed upstairs, a sound that froze me where I stood. I bolted up the stairs, taking them two at a time. The hallway light flickered again, but this time every door was wide open. Laura was standing outside our bedroom, holding Emma and our son, both crying. "He's in there," she whispered. "He's in our room." The door creaked behind her. I stepped forward, shining my phone's light into the darkness. At first I saw nothing. Then, in the far corner, something moved slow, deliberate. A figure crouched low, its back turned toward us. Its skin looked stretched, almost translucent, like it had been burned. "Who are you?" I shouted. The thing straightened. Its head turned slowly, too slowly, and I saw its face, or what was left of it. Hollow eyes, no mouth, but a faint sound came from it anyway. A wet, choking breath that made my stomach twist. Laura pulled the kids back, screaming. I grabbed the door and slammed it shut, pressing my weight against it. But something pushed from the other side, hard. The door shook violently, pounding again and again, until the hinges groaned. "Go!" I yelled. "Downstairs!" Now, we ran. The kids were crying, Laura sobbing, and behind us the pounding grew louder, faster. When we reached the living room, every window shattered at once. Not from impact, but from pressure, like something inside the house was expanding. The air roared, hot and cold all at once. The lights flickered in rapid bursts, and for 1 second I saw them. Dozens of figures, pale and twisted, lining the walls. Watching, their mouths moved in unison, but no sound came out, just the faint hum of static. Then, all at once, they screamed. It wasn't sound, it was vibration, a physical thing that rattled my bones. I dropped to my knees, covering my ears, but it didn't stop. The walls trembled, the floorboards cracked, and above it all, a voice, deep, distorted, spoke from nowhere and everywhere. "No one sleeps here." Alara was shouting my name, shaking me. The sound cut off suddenly, leaving only silence. When I opened my eyes, everything was still again. The lights were off. The windows were whole. The furniture, untouched. It was as if nothing had happened. But the kids were still sobbing, clutching Laura's arms. We didn't speak for a long time. We just sat there, shaking, staring at the shadows that still clung to the corners. Finally, I whispered, "We're leaving." "Tomorrow." Alara nodded. That night, none of us slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the echoes of that voice. Calm, certain, unending, no one sleeps here. But we left the next morning before the sun came up. There was no discussion, no hesitation. Just the quiet, heavy understanding between us that if we stayed even one more night, something terrible would happen. Laura packed the kids in the car while I went from room to room, grabbing whatever I could: clothes, documents, a few toys. I didn't look too long at anything. The less I saw, the better. The house felt awake, aware, like it knew we were leaving. When I locked the front door for the last time, the air felt thick, humid. I swear I heard a whisper behind me, faint, almost kind. Don't bother. No one ever leaves. I didn't turn around. We drove in silence for hours. The kids eventually fell asleep in the back seat, and Laura just stared out the window, her hands gripping the seatbelt. Neither of us said a word until we pulled into my brother's driveway 3 towns over. We stayed there for a while. A week, then 2. The first few nights I woke up expecting to hear something, the creak of footsteps, the hum of whispers. But there was nothing, just peace, ordinary silence. Still, none of us could sleep. Even the kids tossed and turned. Laura said it felt like our bodies had forgotten how. I kept thinking about the house, about what we'd seen, or thought we saw. My mind kept trying to reason it away. Stress, exhaustion, shared hysteria, maybe even carbon monoxide leaks or bad wiring. Something rational. But every time I tried to convince myself, I'd remember the voice. That deep, distorted voice that had said my name, and the way the house had gone completely still after it spoke, as if it had finished something. 2 weeks later, I got a call from our realtor. "I don't know how to say this," she began, "but the people who came to clean after you left. They found something." Well, my throat tightened. "What do you mean, something?" "In the crawl space," she said quietly. "A small door behind the insulation. They said it looked like it hadn't been opened in decades." I waited. They found old bedding, torn sheets, and something written on the wall in chalk. What did it say? There was a pause. Then she whispered, "No one slept." I hung up. That night, I dreamed I was standing in the hallway again. The same flickering light, the same cold air pressing against my chest. The walls were breathing, slow, steady, like lungs. From somewhere deep within them came the sound of sobbing. Then, a whisper near my ear. "You locked us in." I woke up gasping. My pillow was damp, though I couldn't tell if it was from sweat or tears. The next morning, Laura said she dreamed the exact same thing. We never talked about the house again after that. Not directly, but we both knew it hadn't let us go. The kids grew quieter. Emma stopped drawing for a while. When she finally did, her pictures were of a white house with black windows. Sometimes, she'd draw small gray shapes in the walls. Thin, stretched faces. When I asked her about them, she said, "They're still awake. A month's passed. We rented a small townhouse closer to the city, tried to move on. But sleep never came easy. No matter how tired I was, the moment I started drifting off, I'd hear something faint. A breath, a creak, a whisper that always came from inside the walls. At first, I thought it was memory, trauma, the mind replaying what it can't understand. But then, one night, while checking on the kids, I saw it. Just for a second, a shadow moving along the hallway wall, slow and deliberate. It stopped at Emma's door. Then, as if realizing I was watching, it turned. I didn't see a face, just an outline. But the shape raised a hand, one long finger pressed to where its lips should have been. "Shh," and then it was gone. I stood there for a long time, frozen, the silence pressing in. When I finally opened Emma's door, she was awake, sitting upright, staring at the same wall. Before I could speak, she whispered, "He followed us." I wanted to tell her she was dreaming, that none of this was real. But the words wouldn't come out, because I could hear it too, faint, muffled, coming from deep inside the walls. A rhythm. A sound like slow, shallow breathing. That was weeks ago. Since then, the nights have blurred together. Some evenings, the walls stay silent. Other times, I hear movement. Something dragging, something pacing. I've stopped checking. Laura and I barely talk about it anymore. It's like admitting it out loud gives it power. Sometimes when I wake up around 3 a.m., I can feel someone standing at the foot of our bed. I never open my eyes. I just lie there pretending to be asleep, because deep down I know that's what it wants. It doesn't want to scare us anymore. It just wants us to stay awake with it. Always awake, always listening, because the truth is, we never really left that house. It's still with us, and in the quietest hours of the night, when everything is still and the world feels hollow and empty, I can still hear the whisper, soft, calm, almost tender. No one sleeps here. They moved out 3 months later. The house stayed empty for a while, but the lights never stopped turning on. Some say they see shadows in the upstairs window, even now. Others claim they hear voices when they walk their dogs past the gate. Nobody lives there anymore, but if you listen, you might still hear the whispers of those who tried, the ones who never truly slept. Thank you for joining me tonight on Midnight Hunt. If this story kept you awake, you're not alone. Subscribe for more true horrors whispered from the dark corners of memory. Until next time, keep your doors locked, keep your lights low, and remember, the hunt never ends at midnight.